my top 10 horror movies. As the word "my" in the title would suggest, these picks are completely personal, meaning that factors like cultural relevancy or critical reception, popularity, etc., will have no real impact on this list. And there will be spoilers. You've been warned. Number 10, Child's Play 2, 1990. When I was about 7, maybe 8 years old, I was flipping through channels on the TV and I stumbled upon a scene from Child's Play 2, where Chucky, the homicidal doll, was murdering a teacher with a yardstick. The killing itself didn't scare me, not as much as the look of malevolent joy on Chucky's face while he did the deed. So frightened by this scene, I immediately turned off the TV and ran crying to my mommy, terrified that my own toys would soon come to life and murder me with the same sadistic glee in their eyes. I was so hysterically frightened that I made my mom bag up every stuffed animal I had and put them all in storage beneath the house, but even that didn't assuage my terror. My young imagination was maggoty, with horrific visions of an army of fuzzy stuffed animals cutting their way out of their hefty bag prisons with inexplicably acquired butcher knives and making their way upstairs to riddle me with blood-gushing stab wounds. Child's Play 2 was not the first horror movie I ever encountered, but it was the first to terrify me. I haven't experienced terror like that since. As an adult, I've occasionally faced danger in the form of natural disasters, aggressive people, accidents that threatened life or limb. But none of those things scared me as bad as my own childhood toys in that moment, on that night. A short time later, I became fascinated with horror movies and worked up the courage to rent the 3 Child's Play movies that existed at the time. And while the original film is a lot of fun with a lot of memorable and scary sequences, Child's Play 2 was my favorite entry then, and it remains so to this day. Why? It's not just because of the impact it had on my forming little brain. It's just because it has an amazingly conceived set piece of a finale where Andy and his foster sister Kyle must do battle with Chucky in the good guy doll's factory. And it's just a blast that makes tremendous use of that premise. It elevates the whole film above its predecessor for me. Plus, I'm just a sucker for a lot of false endings. You know what I'm talking about? Where you think the monster's dead, but then they come back for one final scare, and then they're really dead, but then they come back again for one really final scare. Ooh. Number 9, Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood, 1988. Jason Voorhees had to be represented on this list. He's my second favorite unstoppable silent killing machine that loves to find creative ways to end the lives of innocent 25-year-old teenagers. So why Part 7? Because after 6 films of Jason butchering defenseless kill fodder, well, I guess it was Mrs. Voorhees in the first one, but whatever. It was awesome to see him up against an opponent who could actually fight back. The main character in the film is a telekinetic girl named Tina, who is basically just a slapdash ripoff of Carrie White from the Stephen King story, but instead of her trauma coming from religious indoctrination at the hands of an overbearing mother, it comes from the memory of accidentally killing her father as a child. None of this really matters that much, to be honest with you. The characters are just the usual mix of unlikable douchebags that only exist to beef up Jason's kill count, and for most of the film, it's standard Friday the 13th fare, which is to say it's pretty good if you like that sort of thing, and I do. But where it truly distinguishes itself from the previous flicks is when Tina uses her telekinesis against Jason in a prolonged final battle with several fake-out endings and probably my favorite version of Jason's maskless face. They pull out all the stops for this sequence. They electrocute him, they smash him, they burn him, and he just keeps coming back for more. Maybe it's not a masterpiece, but who needs it to be? Not me. Number 8, Halloween, 1978. How could any self-respecting fan of slasher films not pay some form of tribute to this crown jewel of the genre? Sometimes you'll hear it said that this film is the very first slasher movie. It's definitely not. But even if it didn't invent the genre, it certainly catapulted it to new heights of popularity. But that's not why it's on this list. I don't care about cultural impact, remember? It's here for one reason and one reason only, because John Carpenter's soundtrack could make anything scary. But you play it over a mouth-breathing lunatic in an expressionless, ghostly white mask, stalking towards you with a gigantic butcher knife, well, at that point, you've got no choice but to shit your britches. Donald Pleasance is superlative as Dr. Samuel Loomis, who is trying to stop Michael from butchering half the teenagers in the all-American town of Haddonfield. But really, his main function in the film is to serve as Michael's hype man, and to that effect, he is constantly making melodramatic speeches about how Michael is the embodiment of pure evil. Jamie Lee Curtis is also phenomenal in her big screen debut as Laurie Strode. She plays the character as likably down-to-earth, vulnerable enough to root for, but tough enough that you believe it when she prevails over evil. It's not on this list because it's a classic, but it is a classic for a reason. Number 7, Stepfather 2, 1989. I love the 1987 psychological horror classic, The Stepfather, but for my money, Stepfather 2 is the true banger of the trilogy. This is the best kind of sequel because it's not just a rehash of the original. It actually builds onto the premise and explores totally different territory. You guys might notice I don't like to give plot synopses because, frankly, plot doesn't matter all that much to me. But quickly, to summarize this one, because I kind of have to explain this, The Stepfather is loosely based on the mass murderer John List, who killed his entire family on November 9th, 1971. So the original Stepfather asks, what if a guy like John List was not just a one-time mass murderer, but a serial mass murderer whose MO is that he is an identity-changing chameleon who integrates himself into families that need a dad, but when he's done toying with them with his G. Willikers Father Knows Best act, he butchers them all like cattle and then moves on to his next family of victims. Stepfather 1 is about a teenage girl, the stepdaughter, who doesn't buy that her stepfather, Jerry, is this nice guy. Everyone thinks he is. She sees that he's really a creep, but no one believes her. That's a pretty cool premise, and it makes for a great movie, mostly owing to the would have been nominated for an Oscar if it wasn't in a horror movie performance by Terry O'Quinn in the titular role.
Wait a minute. Who am I here?
Jerry.
Jerry. Jerry Blake. Thank you, honey.
Stepfather 2 masterfully builds on the premise of the first film. The stepfather has escaped from a mental institution and assumed a new identity as a psychiatrist named Gene Clifford. He immediately sets to work courting a new family, and you see him social engineer his way from total stranger to beloved fiancé and surrogate father in no time flat. It's this focus on the courtship process that makes this film interesting. In the previous film, we only meet him once he's already established himself into the family, so this film sheds light on a totally different stage of his murderous cycle. And when his true nature is prematurely revealed to his bride-to-be, it culminates in a very memorable wedding day. Number 6, Little Shop of Horrors, 1986. Is this really a horror movie, I asked myself? Well, it's about a giant plant that eats people, and it's got the word horrors right in the title, so yes, I suppose it must be. Frank Oz's Little Shop of Horrors is based on an off-Broadway musical, which was itself based on a 1960 film that schlock director Roger Corman made in 2 days when he realized that he had a set left over from a previous film, Bucket of Blood. Today, the Corman version of Little Shop is probably best known for featuring a very early performance from Jack Nicholson, but the 1960 version isn't the one we're talking about today. It is an entertaining flick, but it's more of a curiosity than anything. We're talking about the 86 version, which is a blast. Now, normally, musicals are not my favorite genre. Often, I don't care for the music. But Little Shop of Horrors is definitely an exception. Most of the songs are good. The only song I actively dislike is Suddenly Seymour. I'm also not the biggest fan of Somewhere That's Green. Rick Moranis is great because he's Rick Moranis. He's just effortlessly likable. Ellen Greene looks great as Audrey and plays the role very oddly, but it's fascinating. Vincent Gardenia kills it as the delightfully scummy flower shop owner, Mr. Mushnick. Steve Martin is hilarious as the sadistic greaser dentist. Bill Murray makes a memorable cameo as said dentist's masochistic patient, and John Candy also turns up in a very welcome cameo. But the real stars of this show are the amazing designers and puppeteers that bring the killer plant Audrey 2 to life. And a tremendous amount of credit must also go to the voice of Audrey 2, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted R&B singer Levi Stubbs, who just imbues the character with a personality every bit as big as the puppet itself.
No shit, Sherlock.
This is a great, quirky, funny musical, but there's plenty of monsters, murder, and mayhem to remind you at all times that you are indeed watching a horror film. One word of advice, make sure you watch the version of this movie that contains the original ending. If you end up accidentally watching the version with the happy ending, don't worry, there are plenty of YouTube uploads of the proper ending, which is infinitely better for 2 reasons. 1, it doesn't completely betray the anti-capitalist message of the film, and 2, it features an army of killer plants eating the entire human race. Well, here we are at the halfway point. 5 films past, 5 films yet to come. I got 2 brand new shirts on sale. Figured it's about time I shill them. Based on some cringy Christian propaganda from the 90s, you can buy my drugs shirt. You can also buy my Ancestor shirt. These are exactly the sort of edgy designs that let everyone around you know that you're a degenerate weirdo. And if you're not the kind of person that wants everyone around you to know that, then I don't want to know you, buddy. You can buy those shirts in the description down below. And you can just do it right now. You can pause the video. It's not going anywhere. You go over there, you buy the shirts, you come back, you watch the next 5 movies. What do you say? Sounds good? Do it. You done it? All right, cool. Now back to the list. Number 5, They Live, 1988. A lot of 80s movies on this list. This is also our second John Carpenter film on the list. It's also our second film to feature Meg Foster as the film's love interest. The first being Stepfather 2. She's a strange-looking lady, mostly owing to her distinctive eyes that are just such an insane shade of pale blue that they almost look white. She also bears a more than passing resemblance to Kirstie Alley, interestingly enough. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. They Live stars professional wrestler Rowdy Roddy Piper as a nameless, down-on-his-luck drifter searching for honest work in a crumbling economy. Despite his destitution, he still believes in the American dream until he finds a pair of sunglasses that show him the truth. Humanity has been quietly conquered by some butt-ugly, yuppie aliens who have economically exploited us through rampant commercialism and who control us through brainwashing media. So, kind of like real life. Only instead of taking it in the butt from these upper-crust monsters, Roddy grabs a gun and starts shooting every yuppie alien he can. This film contains unforgettable lines like, "I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum." That's probably the most famous line, but my favorite line is, "Brother, life's a bitch, and she's back in heat. The best scene in the movie, though, has almost nothing to do with the aliens. It's when Roddy Piper and Keith David have the most prolonged and ridiculous fight scene in the history of motion pictures. The fight is nearly 7 minutes long and was parodied by South Park. The thing I love most about this movie is that it really shoves its message down your throat. John Carpenter is like, fuck subtlety, most people are too stupid to get subtlety anyway. He then proceeds to make the most unabashedly eat the rich movie ever made, starring a pro wrestler fighting aliens. What's not to love? Number 4, A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. This is the movie that made America fall in love with a severely burned, child-murdering sicko with knives on his fingers. This is Wes Craven's best film, and I don't think it's particularly close. This film revitalized the flagging slasher genre with a uniquely twisted antagonist in the form of the now world-famous Freddy Krueger, played by Robert Englund. But the film's second biggest strength is the strong female lead of Heather Langenkamp, portraying final girl Nancy Thompson. This movie would probably be lambasted as woke by the inane fake internet critics of the day for depicting a strong teenage girl prevailing over a sadistic male predator after the males in her own life, her useless cop father played by John Saxon and her hapless dipshit boyfriend played by young Johnny Depp completely failed to protect her. This movie relentlessly blurs the line between dreams and reality, and in the context of the film, reality is actually a much safer place than dreams. Because as the original tagline will tell you, if Nancy doesn't wake up screaming, she won't wake up at all. There's plenty of cerebral elements to chew on if you like that sort of thing, but even if that doesn't turn you on, the film's got some amazing set pieces, great practical effects, a strong script, distinctive and fascinating characters, and of course, one of the most terrifying and iconic villains ever created. I'm always shocked, by the way, to hear people say that Freddy doesn't have a sense of humor in this film. I mean, he's not the campy goofball he is in some of the later films, but he's definitely got a sense of humor. It's about as pitch black as a moonless midnight in the coal mines, but it's there. There's so many unforgettable sequences, I'm just gonna spew them out rapid fire. The opening sequence of Freddy building his glove, Tina's dream, Tina's murder, Nancy's classroom dream, the iconic bathtub sequence, Glenn's death, the stairway turning to goo, the phone turning into Freddy's mouth. I'm just scratching the surface. Unlike some films on this list, this film is broadly recognized as a masterpiece, and for good reason. It is. Oh, and the theme music is also freaking great. Number 3, Terrifier 2, 2022. Despite the fact that almost every film on this list comes from the 80s, there are a lot of modern horror films that I do really enjoy. Hereditary, The Witch, The Lighthouse, Mandy, X, Train to Busan, Get Out, Barbarian, and plenty of others I'm probably forgetting. But by now, you've probably detected that my taste in horror films veers a little bit cheesier than most of that fare. It's not like I can't enjoy a deeply unsettling horror film that takes itself gravely seriously, but that's not my favorite approach to this genre. I still enjoy every movie I just listed. In fact, some of them I adore, but there's only one movie made in the 2000s that cracks my top 10, and that's Terrifier 2, the story of a happy clown named Art and his various madcap hijinks. This film was made on a budget of $250,000, raised almost entirely by fans on Indiegogo, but this went on to gross $15.1 million at the box office. Who knows what it's grossed on streaming since, but given the ongoing and well-deserved hype, I'm assuming it's a lot. Art the Clown instantly and seamlessly joins the pantheon of great horror slashers, thanks to the gleeful and strangely innocent way he is portrayed by David Howard Thornton. But what really stands out about Terrifier 2 is it is one of the most relentlessly gory and unbelievably sadistic horror films ever created. Freddy or Chucky might taunt you a bit, but Art is going to make sure that you suffer the greatest indignity possible and the most pain possible. He revels in causing trauma, physical and emotional, to his victims, but he does it all with a lovable cheerfulness that just makes him irresistibly charismatic. You would think that with a runtime of 138 minutes, this film would feel bloated and excessive, and indeed, some critics have felt that way, but for me, the time passed like a breeze. Thanks mostly to a strong story and well-written characters that were well fleshed out before they lost all their flesh. That's one of the ways that Terrifier 2 ups the ante over the 80s slashers that it was so clearly inspired by. The characters that were killed by Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger were often written so thinly that they came across as little more than stereotypes of stereotypes, characters who existed solely to have someone for the monster to kill. But here, the characters have genuine humanity, and that makes watching them face the brutality and trauma of a demonic clown with an infinite capacity for sadism so much more compelling. Number 2, The Fly from 1986. As Gina Davis and the movie's poster say, be afraid, be very afraid. And if you are at all affected by the disturbing subgenre of body horror, you're not going to find that directive too difficult. The Fly is the story of a scientist named Seth Brundle, played by Jeff Goldblum, on the cusp of a major scientific breakthrough, the instantaneous teleportation of matter from one location to another. But one drunken night, he gets tired of the slow pace of the scientific process and decides he wants to begin human trials early. So he hops in the telepod and beams himself across the room. He emerges on the other side, apparently unharmed, but unbeknownst to him, a housefly was in the telepod with him. Now, the computer didn't quite know how to handle that, and so it decided to just go ahead and fuse Seth and the housefly together on a genetic level. What ensues is the gradual transformation of Seth Brundle into Brundlefly, an insect-human hybrid that increasingly yields to insect aggression as his humanity slips away. In a beautiful and heart-wrenching speech to his love interest Ronnie, played by the lovely Gina Davis, Brundlefly utters one of my favorite lines in movie history. He says, "I'm an insect who dreamt he was a man and loved it, but now the dream is over and the insect is awake." Now that shit is positively Shakespearean. This movie is about losing your humanity, and as such, it's one of the most poignant films ever made about the value of being human in the first place. Plus, it's got a monster puking acid on donuts and then sucking up the liquefied sludge that they turn into. So it's both beautiful and disgusting. What more could you really want? All right, so before we get to number 1 on the list, I want to mention, if you're looking for some horror of a more erotic nature, I've written a Vor comic called Going Ham that is pinned to my now defunct Twitter, but you can still go there and buy it, purchase it, read it, let me know what you think. Obviously, it's NSFW, so follow your local laws and customs and blah, 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 blah. Well, once again, also ask you to buy my shirts because they're awesome. I know that you're super cool, so you already bought my shirts, but it doesn't hurt to remind all those losers out there that aren't as cool as you are. All right, now it's time for number 1, so drum roll. My number 1 horror movie is Hotel Transylvania 3, Summer Vacation 2018. Adam Sandler and the Monster Gang are back with more hilarious family fun that's sure to delight and amuse. Nah, fuck that. Number 1, Evil Dead 2, 1987. One word you've heard me use a lot in this video is sequence, because I love a good sequence. In filmmaking, if a scene is like a sentence, then a sequence is like a paragraph. A bunch of scenes brought together by some sort of thematic element. For me, a standout sequence, a really dynamic paragraph, can make a whole film. Like the rug from The Big Lebowski ties the whole room together, a great sequence can tie a whole film together. But Evil Dead 2 just says, fuck all that. Let's make every individual sequence a goddamn standalone masterpiece, and that's exactly what it does. From start to finish, you are grabbed firmly by the nuts or by the labia, even though this now sounds weird and Weinstein-y, and you are pulled from one insane sequence to the next insane sequence, and insane is the right word because this film is relentless insanity. Every time you think it's gonna like pause to let you catch your breath, it's gonna give those nuts or what have you another tug, and you're suddenly back in hell. Bruce Campbell is obviously perfect. He is a genius in this movie. He combines slapstick comedy and over-the-top horror in a way that if he hadn't done it, no one else ever would have. The only other actor that would have been capable of playing the role comparably would have been a young Jim Carrey, and the sort of physicality that Carrey was so loved and praised for a decade later is done just as well here, if not better. And in a much cooler way, because who wants to watch Ace Ventura throw a fit because his fragile masculinity couldn't handle the fact he was attracted to a trans woman when you could instead watch Ash Williams do battle with his own demon-possessed hand? There's really not much more to say. Everything about this film is entertaining. There's a cliche that's often used to describe something that's great. Never a dull moment. I find that's usually a lie. Most films, even great ones, need some dull moments. But Evil Dead 2 neither has them nor needs them. It's a berserk horror comedy that discovers that the proper way to balance out those two genres is just to crank both dials to 10. Can't go wrong with that. I expect a lively comment section on this one. I want you guys to let me know, what'd you agree with? What'd you not agree with? Have you seen these films? Do you want to recommend me some films? Are you going to take any of my recommendations? Discuss all of that and more down below. Buy those shirts. Hit that stupid freaking alert bell if you haven't hit that alert bell, because apparently that thing matters more than it freaking should. Used to be you just click the subscribe button and it would let you know stuff. Now you got to subscribe and hit some dumbass bell. There's actually 2 bells. Think that's convoluted enough? Used to just be, yeah, like you click subscribe, it tells you what the channel's gonna do. Now it's like, okay, you can hit subscribe, plus you can hit the bell that lets you know some of the time, and then you can hit the bell that lets you know all the time. Freaking just have a thing that tells me when something, whatever, YouTube, you fucking suck. Anyway, I'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you did. Let me know if you didn't. Blah, 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 etc., etc., etc. You know the thing. Bye. I'm leaving. I'm gone. I'm not even stopping the video. I'm just going to walk away.